Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. 8 former Indian Navy personnel have been sentenced to death in Qatar after being arrested in the country last year for alleged espionage. All 8 of those sentenced were employed by security solutions provider Dehra Global, which was shut down in May this year. Reportedly, the Qatari-based company was providing services for a Qatari program to obtain high-tech Italian-made submarines. Qatari authorities have accused the Indian nationals of spying on the country's secret submarine program for Israel. They also say that they have electronic evidence to support their claims. India's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said that the government is shocked by the verdict and exploring all legal options. To take this forward, I'm now joined by KP Fabian, former Indian ambassador to Qatar, and M. Ganesan, barrister and partner at Aliant Law UK. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Fabian, we'd like to understand, how do you think India was not able to diplomatically resolve this in the last 1 year?
Well, I don't think it could have been resolved diplomatically after the matter became a case in Qatar Court, because, it will be awkward for them to settle with India. Because the position is that whether the evidence is, in our eyes, good or bad, Qatar believes that it has got good evidence supporting its conclusion that there was espionage. And once the matter went to the court, and even before that, Qatar was very reluctant because it's a very sensitive matter. Our vice president was there, if you remember. Well, there was no discussion. Also, we should understand that because of some statements made by one RSS spokesperson, Nupur Sharma, I believe, Qatar was very, very annoyed with us. And if you remember, the ambassador was summoned even when the vice president was in town. So I don't think we have handled it very well. And one of the things we could have done was to have invited Qatar and other GCC members to the G20. Then you see the Amir would have come here, and a personal meeting between him and the Prime Minister might have delivered the desired result. But we didn't do that. Right. What would be the reasoning? So we could have handled it better, but now we can, I hope, we can hope for a pardon at the level of His Highness the Amir. But, that is a process which we have to start.
Right. Ambassador Fabian, what I would also like to understand is the kind of charges that are playing out in the media and which have not been rebutted by either of the sides. There is a charge that all these 8 former Navy personnel who were working for Al Dehra, the managing director who was also arrested, is a former commander of the Indian Navy, a decorated officer who led several warships. He had also been felicitated by the Indian embassy in Qatar for his contribution to India-Qatar relations. Could this have been possible? How can one actually connect it to the submarine program? And how could these reports be justified of them spying on behalf of Israel?
I would say that it is, as far as Qatari authorities are concerned, it is not reports. They claim that they have evidence. I do not know what sort of evidence, but probably they have electronic evidence. Now, the question is, whether that evidence is, what shall I say, has been put there by somebody else, another party, fourth party, which has its own interest. That's a different matter, After all, anybody's email can be cracked into. Somebody can crack into my email and then put their emails which give the impression that I was in contact with some foreign intelligence agency and all that. Whether that is something which happened to our people, I do not know. One can only speculate. But the point is, at this moment, Qatar believes that it has got good evidence, not reports.
That's an important point. Right. Mr. Ganesan, coming to you, how do you think the law will play out now? The Qatari courts and the Qatar government, we're told by Indian authorities, have not shared many details about this case or the kind of charges that have been made. Even Subramaniam Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, when he was asked, he said that Qataris have not shared too much about this case. Give us a sense of how the proceedings have taken place in the court of first instance in Qatar, and what is the legal recourse that the 8 Indians have right now?
Thank you so much. Yes, it is an unfortunate situation that these 8 individuals are finding themselves in. But as you say, the key aspect that seems to be really missing from the public glare, at least public scrutiny, is what is the evidence against these men and what is the foundation on which these charges have been laid. And of course, one of the issues that we face at the moment from the legal perspective point of view, as Ambassador Fabian has said earlier, that now the proceedings are firmly in the court system. And of course, we've had the first instance judgment, which was given yesterday. But as you rightly say, nobody has actually seen the details of the judgment, the legal basis on which these convictions have been made, nor the actual evidential foundation, which Ambassador Fabian referred to. And I think these are really the critical matters on which the Qatari courts have clearly examined it and have been satisfied there is sufficient evidence on which to convict. But of course, that does not mean that's the end of the road for the Indian nationals. They have the appeal to the Court of Appeal, and the appeal is within 15 days. But also because this is a case in which it involves a death penalty, then the prosecutors themselves will have to explain the legal and the factual foundation on which these convictions have been rendered by the court. So it's really is a question of waiting in the next 48 hours, as we understand from the media reports, for the actual detailed judgment to be given. Bearing in mind the sensitive nature of the charges, it is understandable not a huge amount of data has come through in the public glare. But nevertheless, the public are entitled, in my view, to understand the foundations, at least in broad spectrum, of the real evidence against these 8 men, bearing in mind the fact that these are highly experienced, decorated naval officers, and they were, as we understand from the public information available, they're in fact providing training to the Qatari government. At least that's what seems to come through. So those are the key aspects which we will only know once the judgment comes through, which no doubt will lead to an appeal automatically to the Court of Appeal because of the sentence that's involved in it.
Mr. Ganesan, also when it comes to courts in Qatar, they don't work in a very transparent fashion. We don't have much information coming in. Apart from what's happening in the courts in Qatar, is there any international legal forum that these 8 Indian citizens and the Indian government has to either slow down the progress of the case or put a pause to it?
And I think that's a very, very important and interesting question. And as Ambassador Fabian said, we're already in the Qatari process, and the 8 individuals must go through the Qatari criminal appeal process that's available. In addition to that, of course, we have the international cooperation and we have the diplomatic relationships between India and Qatar, which must be utilized to a full extent. I'm pleased to see the Ministry of External Affairs are taking this matter extremely seriously and are working, no doubt, in the background in working with the Qatari authorities to find a solution, if at all possible, in relation to that. Additionally, the international forums, one has to consider very carefully, and I think it's very difficult to really answer that question until we know, as you say, transparency in terms of what the charges are, how the charges have been framed, what are the actual evidences, and what has in fact been brought to the court, which had allowed it to actually look at. There are international covenants, for example, in relation to civil and political rights, particularly that deals with death penalties and what's expected of international community and international authorities, and how the standards to be applied. And particularly, for example, looking at Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which particularly prohibits inhumane treatment, and of course with reference to death penalties. So in terms of the international ability to challenge, international ability to get Qatar involved in an international forum, that really is something that we will need to look at once the judgment comes out, in a way to see whether, for instance, the Qatar detained Indian nationals have had complete and full access to consular support and services. From the publicly available information, we can see there has been some level of consular access. How that is, how effective that is, something that we need to consider. The second we need to consider is how effective has been the ability of these Indian nationals to be able to have proper legal representation within the Qatari courts. Again, we are entirely unclear on that, and whether those Qatari proceedings were in a language that was able to be understood by these 8 individuals. So the trial process itself is a significant concern, which we can only address once we have the judgment available and once there is a bit more transparency, clarity and guidance as to what actually has been happening since their arrest, which was on 30th of August 2022, as we understand, and the charges were only framed in March of this year. So there was a long period of time. Again, we read from the public
Mr. Ganesan,
information available.
we're running out of time. One brief question to Ambassador Fabian. Ambassador Fabian, now that this has happened, there is also a lot of criticism. Why and what were we doing for the last 1 year? Why couldn't we get these 8 citizens out? Now that this has happened, diplomatically, what is the option which will allow Qatar, its leadership, to release these people, to pardon these people? Briefly, if you could tell us in about 20 seconds.
Well, let me put it this way. We might examine the merits of going international and ICJ and all that, but my preference will be to do it bilaterally. And at the right time, we should seek pardon from the Amir, because the families had asked for it, but when Government of India asks for it, that's a different matter. And what is required is a personal meeting at the summit level as early as possible. And I expect these people to be freed by Ramadan 2024, that is April.
Right. So you're saying that a meeting at the summit level, at the meeting of heads of state, or at least at the Prime Minister level. Thank you very much, Ambassador Fabian, for joining us, and M. Ganesan as well. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.